Spawnily is the premier podcast spotlighting people of color. Every week, we talk news, what we've been playing, and tell you who's invited to the cookout. Our show is all about talking about gaming through a prism of blackness, because we are the culture. Welcome to Chicago, y'all.
What's good, everybody in Chicago? We have a really dope interview with Olivia Brown coming to us from Project Unloaded. We're super excited to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your patience. I know it's been a pain in the butt, us getting together and making this happen, but I'm super excited for you to be on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
So, one of the things that we love on Spawn and Me is, I think one of the discussions that we like to get into is, besides video game things, we like to talk about the real world in real ways. It is always important for us to make sure that that is a part of the cultural, work that we do. And when your team reached out to come and hang out on the show, I was super, super excited, because one of the things that we do on our show is when we have charitable events and things that we do, for the people and by the people, we want to make sure that we're not only kind of bridging the gap between, the off-world gaming stuff that we do and what's happening to folks in our neighborhoods and the people we care about and spaces that we love. And one of the big conversations that has been in all of those spaces has been about gun violence, and especially gun violence that's happening in youth spaces. So to hear that you all are tackling this really, really hard problem with some fantastic work is dope. It's really great to be able to hear that. For the folks who don't know about Project Unloaded, give them a little bit of info about like the organization, how it kind of started, and what's the kind of main ethos for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, Project Unloaded is a national violence prevention organization. Our theory of change is about inspiring a new narrative story about the way guns and safety are viewed in our country. So we do that work in two ways. And one thing I forgot to mention, we are working primarily to target teenagers, and that's all of this that I'm mentioning about our work and Project Unloaded at large is on purpose, rooted in research, and really with the goal of creating a new culture. So we work online, we create large-scale social media campaigns, all of which share the message that you're safer unarmed to young people. We want to give them a safe space to ask questions about guns and learn about guns in a fact-based, safe way. And we do that through a couple campaigns. I'll talk about some in a second.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. And we also do that through community partner programs, which is the work that I lead at Project Unloaded. So we have boots on the ground in communities where young people are experiencing elevated rates of gun violence. We're working with them to make them or train them to become influencers in their own community. Every young person ever is online. Every young person, not every, but lots of them want to be content creators, and we support them in making that dream come true while also giving them the tools to have the conversation about guns with their platforms, with their friends, with their families. So it's really rewarding for me to be able to see my student create an ad, and then that ad shows up on Snapchat, and then that Snapchat ad becomes a conversation starter for them and their friends. That's exactly the work that we're doing. And all of that work is, like I said, with the goal of sharing this message that we're safer unarmed, but it's a lofty generational shift that we're trying to inspire. So the idea is that if as more teens learn this information, as they grow up, less and less of them will choose to own guns, and gun violence and injuries and death related will go down. It's kind of the model that the Truth Initiative, if you're old enough to remember those cigarette smoking campaigns, is exactly the model that those folks were doing. And we think and we know that it can work with guns.
One of the things that as a former youth,
aren't we all? Right? I too was a teen.
Right. I too didn't know what I was doing for half my life. One of the things that kind of comes through for work like this as as an organization and as a company doing this is, messaging is really, really hard, especially for folks who are in that age group. We are in a space where attention spans are even shorter than when we grew up. Kids are getting inundated with so many data points and so many visuals of everything that's constantly happening. How are you reaching those folks to be able to kind of move that messaging in a kind of more future facing and future forward
Yeah.
relevant space for them when they are constantly being barraged by so many things?
Yeah, everything that we do is rooted in research. We don't do anything or say anything to young people that we haven't asked them about how to say. What I mean by that is that all of our campaigns start with a really robust research process where we're doing focus groups and interviews with young people to learn more about what they think about how we're approaching this message, but also how they think we should. And all of that goes into the creation of a campaign. So one of our campaigns, Leave Guns in the Game, for example, for our gamers out there, Leave Guns in the Game was created after a couple rounds of research where we noticed that gaming kept coming up. We asked students, how do you learn about guns? And most of them will say TV and movies. A lot of them, especially young boys, will say games on video games. So after that, we created this campaign, not to say that, guns, violent video games and guns in video games are making you violent, but rather to say that, you have your community here. We can use this community to have a conversation. So, and that so far has been really successful because these teens in our target demographic, they're excited. They want to have this conversation. And that's another thing that we learned through research is that young people want to know about guns in an accurate, neutral way from people that they trust. And we give them the opportunity to do that. So it's a two-way conversation with our young people all the time, even after a campaign is live, right? It's not just we put a campaign up on the internet and now it's up for you, a young person, to consume it. Like we were just talking about, our students and that we train and work with in the communities, they create ads themselves, and once we have it live, will use that as a tool to have conversations with their friends and their peers as they go on to, keep building and having conversations about these things.
I'm happy to hear you discuss that part because I feel like, there are two things that kind of come up. There are multiple things that come up in a adolescent's life where you're kind of taught by the community as opposed to many times your parents. You're kind of getting that information from your friends, like guns are one thing, sex is one thing. It's like all of those things are kind of in that mix of like, oh, well, I learned this by watching TV, or my friends were talking about it, or a thing that kind of comes up and it's, either taboo or, a thing that a lot of folks, their parents don't want to talk about. And I'm happy to hear you talk about like games being a space where that is happening early for folks and kids are kind of getting their first brushes up against that stuff. Are you finding that when they are talking about games, are they kind of bringing up anything specific in those things? Like I think for folks in the gaming space, we have a couple of games that are well known that are kind of across the board. Everyone thinks of like Call of Duty or anything like that are like prevalent gun games that are first person shooters in those ways. Are you seeing that kids are kind of coming to these titles and these games with an affinity for it already, or is it like their first kind of initial understanding of what weapons are in those ways? And do you feel like the portrayals that you're seeing from the conversations you're having with them are realistic? Because I feel like we're trying to get more realistic in games in some ways, but also you have other avenues like Fortnite that are most kids are playing at this age. What are your observances about like the reality of guns for kids now in kind of digital spaces to real life things?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be me if I didn't leave you and your audience with a fact. So,
Please.
A light one is that gun violence is the number one killer of kids and teens in America right now. So, teens, whether they can name that fact in the way that I just said it in that clear sentence or not, they feel the burden of violence in their communities. And it's interesting because they aren't, saying I have such an affinity to COD or Fortnite, and that's making me want to learn more about guns. It's that they have built relationships with creators, and they are watching live streaming content, and they trust these folks so much to teach them new things. So it's less that they are seeking video games to learn about guns, and more so that video games is kind of just their escape from the world. And we know that so much is happening to the world, and young people are bearing so much of the brunt of it. Video games is just where they go to take a pause. And with that, they're taking a pause and they're building community. And that's what we see more than anything, is that they have such a deep respect and love for their gaming friends. It's not even about just playing the game. And I've been playing, as we roll this campaign out, I've been doing live streams with some of the creators that we work with. That's another piece of our work. We work with influencers. Hello. we work with influencers who, lend us their platforms to have these conversations with their audiences. And as I've played games, one, just cheers to y'all for being able to make this internet work in this way. But as I play games outside of that, you see so many people so many teenagers in these comments saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that, as I share facts with them. Or I have learned things about guns, so it's interesting to come, or they will say, I've learned something about guns by playing this game, so I appreciate you coming to tell me more facts and information. So, yeah, it's less that they start off with violence and more so that they start off just being normal teens who play video games and want to learn more, and we see an opportunity to just have a conversation with them and their creator communities that they trust.
What are some of the facts that you're kind of sharing with those folks when you're having those discussions that perks them up and they're like, you talked about like, oh, I didn't know about that. What are some of the kind of facts that you're sharing with those teens and adolescents that are like turning that light bulb on for them?
Yeah, so I typically will talk about, there's two things I talk about. When you own and carry a gun and you keep a gun in your home, you are 2 times more likely to die by homicide, 3 times more likely to die by suicide. And then when you are carrying a gun in person, you're 4 times more likely to be harmed or die by homicide yourself. You're much more likely to be shot when you carry than you are when you don't carry. So putting that into perspective, just telling a story of one of our colleagues, this is someone who doesn't own a gun. And this is something I share with teens too, right? We have folks that we know who don't own a gun. They've been robbed or assaulted in some way. And they come back and say, I thank God I did not have a gun on me because they would have shot me. Right. And that type of perspective shift, when I lay out this research and then pair it with a story, really opens up their minds, because often we're sold the idea that you need a gun to be safe. And whether you think that's true or you don't, we know that through research that guns make you less safe through all of these things that we said, that I just said. So increasing the risk of suicide, homicide, accidents, injuries, we know that. But yet and still, when you're consistently sold this idea that you need a gun to be safe, everybody around you has a gun, and we know that that's not true too, it really just opens their mind. It makes it so that they're considering a new perspective that they hadn't before. And, not every teen will end a live stream saying, wow, I'm never going to own or touch a gun again, but it opens up the conversation. And that's what we exist to do, to start those conversations and give them the tools to navigate them, those tools being research and facts.
I love that, because I know when I was growing up, I'm originally from the Bronx, back in New York, and there wasn't a concept of gun ownership, to be honest. Like, if you saw a gun, there were 2 questions you would ask. 1, how many bodies are on it? And 2, where'd you get it from? Right? And I think that there were lots of discussions that were prevalent in those spaces in a city that was very, against gun ownership. And there weren't really avenues for it. And it took me until much later in my life, until my 30s or so, to ever have shot my first weapon. And it gave me another layer of like, oh, this is a thing that I know people, flippantly talk about and flippantly kind of use, but like, this is a weapon of destruction. Like, all of these are things that will hurt you in a real tangible way and do damage to folks in that way. Are you seeing, I love the fact you talked about that narrative of like the stories we are told, right? The like, everyone has a gun. You're safer if you have a gun. And it feels like this is a very kind of American story in a lot of different ways. And it feels like that's a thing that we see often. I saw the stat on the website that you all shared that was, about gun ownership, right? Is about how many folks per 100 people per country are owning weapons. And it feels like this is a very American problem, even though it is a thing that is across the world, a very American problem. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, if you are a Beyonce fan out there, you've heard the words "America has a problem," and America does have a problem. It's a gun violence problem. It's a gun problem. It is a uniquely American problem where so many of our citizens own guns, but it's simple math when you say where more people own guns, more gun violence happens. And I think that it's just that simple. But because of lots of levers in American culture, people still believe that you need a gun to be safe. People aren't making that connection that the gun violence that they experience. And when I say gun violence, I want to be explicit in saying that we include suicides, homicides, mass shootings. All of these things are considered gun violence. And it's important to make that distinction because it's not just crime, right? It's the injuries that happen when you leave a gun unlocked and a little kid can find it, right? It's the accidents, it's the suicides too. So that's to say it's uniquely American, and people aren't drawing that conclusion that like it is the guns that are making this problem. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, but a gun is an inanimate object, it doesn't."
It's not the gun that did it; it's the person. Yeah,
it's the people, and I'm like, yeah, but it's the gun too. Yeah. Like, you can say whatever you want about the people. I'm not here to chastise people, but it's the gun and the access to a gun that made it possible. And unfortunately, in our country, we just have so much access to guns that makes all of this violence possible. Where other countries, through their regulations, through a different culture that they have, and a different relationship to guns, they don't experience this at the rate that we do. And America has a problem in a nutshell.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I'm again like referencing stuff that's on the website, and gun deaths per 100,000 people. We're at the top of that list too, at 4.12 gun deaths per 100,000 people, and our closest, I hate to use the word or phrase runner-up is Chile, which is at 1.82. Of those things, which is a significant lower number than where we are in the mix for those things. It winds up feeling like, because this is a part of the ethos of America too, which is, the discussion about like freedom of right and freedom of those things. It feels like that has been taken on to an extra layer of potential, like, immediate danger for folks who are your other citizens. One of the things that I thought was really interesting as well, that there was a really good point that you brought up alongside the conversation around like how do you classify gun violence was, one of the biggest things that we've heard for a long period of time again is like guns keep you safer in the house, but like as humans, we're not even locking up our weapons in the ways that we need to, right? There was a stat on the site. There's like over 4.5 million children live in homes with loaded, unlocked, and loaded firearms. How are you all talking about and talking to kids that do live in homes where there already is a weapon in those homes? Are you having very specific conversations not only with them but with their parents, or is that the thing where you're kind of giving the kid resources and then saying like, if you want to talk to your parents about this thing as a way to keep yourself safe, here are some things you can take to them to make that conversation easier?
So it's closer to the latter, but for context, Project Unloaded is only a 3-year-old organization.
Right.
And since we've existed, we've reached 6 million teens online with information that they need. So our idea with that is, like I mentioned, empowering them with information. You can have the conversations that you want. ultimately, though, we hear from our students that, like, I'm a kid, my parent makes decisions for me. What am I supposed to do? And it's a worthy conversation to have still, right? There are lots of organizations and other groups that do the work of educating parents and current gun owners. And I think we all need to be working to be able to make it happen, right? Us at Project Unloaded, working with teens, building their, you know, mental capacity to think about this stuff. Other orgs working with gun owners, talking about safe storage and all that jazz. So it's not our work, but the work is happening still, right? Our work is really hyper focused on young people sharing this information, getting them to talk with each other, because we know that peer-to-peer conversations are so powerful. And even through research, like I've mentioned, everything is rooted in the research. They much prefer to talk to each other than us or their parents or any of that. So we want to give them that opportunity and then leave the opportunity for, you know, working with parents and gun owners and all that for other groups. That's not to say I've never interacted with a parent ever, right? Yeah. We definitely have adult supporters who support our work and parents who are engaged with their young people, support our campaigns too. But what we make still is very specifically for young people talking to other young people.
Yeah. Are you seeing any specific data points that relate to conversations around communities of color and folks in the LGBTQ spaces as well? Because I know there's been a really wild backlash against trans kids and folks in that area. You know, black and brown folks have had stereotypes placed upon them forever in this country in a lot of different ways, and especially now when it comes to conversations around gun ownership, gun violence, and, you know, the specter of the inner city, as they always discuss. Anytime you bring up anything around guns, everybody rolls and runs to Chicago and be like, Chicago, and I'm like, it's not crazy, it's not wild like that. What are some of the things you're all working with and discussing when it comes to those points of the conversation?
Yeah, so right off the bat, you know that this is coming. That whole idea of scapegoating Chicago is racist. Full stop. A lot of why that comes up is to vilify the black and brown communities that live here when we aren't experiencing, you know, any more violence than any other city that has this density of people. So a lot of our teams, though, have internalized this idea, and it's heartbreaking to see that their city is just so dangerous. And some of that is just firsthand experience, right? They live in communities that experience elevated rates of violence. That's unavoidable. They hear gunshots when they go to sleep sometimes. They feel like they need to stay in the house because outside is unpredictable. So I don't want to discredit their firsthand experience, but statistically, we're not any different than any other big city. So what's interesting is that when I get to teach students in program, I really get a close opportunity to sit with them and one, teach them about the history of this culture and how they fit into it, but also about how a lot of what they've been taught is just not true. You know, before we got started, we talked about this article that I read about how you are more likely to be shot in Selma than in Chicago. And even that headline opens up a conversation about gun ownership in rural communities versus gun ownership in urban cities, and what needs to happen to kind of fill any gaps that might exist. So all of it's just rooted in culture, though, you know. And America has an extremely racist culture just through its history, through its nature of origin, right?
Yeah.
So to some effect, as we talk about, you know, changing gun culture and creating a new narrative, it is unpacking where those things even come from, where those stories about Chicago or Selma or New York or any other place that gets thrown around in this conversation. It really comes with unpacking the data, comes with unpacking that with students. And we see them in real time go, oh, it's not me. I'm not this like inherently violent person because I grew up in Chicago. And that is such an important part of the conversation, in my opinion, because it's transforming their ability or expanding their ability to see themselves in the world as they actually are, not as the media wants them to think that they are, as they actually are. And when they get that picture of themselves and they say, wow, I'm not this villain just because I grew up in Chicago, we're able to have such a productive conversation. They're able to get really creative with their friends and their peers, because what we found through research is that teens want to have this conversation. They want to have a conversation about guns. They want to know these facts. They want an adult to tell them, they want an adult to support them through all of that. And we give them that space to do it. So yeah, it's less of seeing, it's less data seeing, it's less of qualitative data, rather. It's seeing numbers that show that story, and more of like when I'm in the classroom, that story about how culture and narrative and the stories that are told about Chicago and teenagers, how it all comes together and how we are able to disrupt it still.
That makes me happy.
Your question? I feel like maybe I got a little preachy on you.
No, that is, you nailed it. Because again, that's the stuff that I think for our audience, which is, our show was built on, telling truth to folks of color and folks from marginalized communities. Like, it's the reason why this show exists. So to hear you say that is, not only informative, but affirming to know that those things are there. Because, I have those conversations with my friends all the time, and I'm like, I'm still waiting for someone to write down the words white on white crime and put that in a book somewhere. and I'm like, I'm waiting for that, because we know, like the real discussion around crime is it's less about race and more about proximity in those ways of like, people around other people, like you wind up having things pop off, and that happens all across.
And access too. It's proximity and access. I just had a conversation with a partner today, and we were just shooting the breeze about, some of these students grow up in areas where they have a grocery store that's right down the street, and some of them have a corner store. It's a very big difference from being able to access fresh fruit and accessing cheddar cheese ruffles, right? And that relates to violence. That relates to crime and why people do it. So some of this work is sharing specific facts about violence. Some of it is violence doesn't just happen in a bottle, right? So it's expanding and talking about how that culture even came to be and what types of things like poverty and environmental injustice make it so that those things, crime and violence, are able to sustain.
Yeah, we do this thing in American culture where we make gun violence and violence, one, very race-based, and then two, it's very lazy. It's very race-based, and then two, it's very supposedly connected to culture, when we all know that the real big elephant in the room is socioeconomic and how those things actually kind of touch in real big ways. So it's again an interesting thing to be able to have kids learn from folks like y'all doing this work, to say, like, again, you are not the problem. There's systems around you.
You're the solution, even.
Right. Like, yeah. I'm happy you talk about the solution part, because I think the thing that I always worry about is, how are we connecting to young folks who are in that Gen Z space? Because Gen Z is moving everything at light speed right now, right? Like, they are changing culture, they're changing language, they're changing fashion, all of those things in the blink of an eye. But it feels like when it comes to these cultural conversations, I worry that they are too busy to care and a little bit too young to care. Like 13 through 25, I didn't know what the hell I was doing at 13 to 25. I was trying to just, go to prom and fill out my FAFSA and try to get my my loan.
Not FAFSA.
Right, I'm old. But like, that kind of stuff of being in the mix, right? But it feels like now that specific age group has even more things to worry about, because when we were growing up, mass shootings weren't a thing in the same ways that they are now. How are they coming to, to kind of take grips of the kind of prevailing violence that are coming to them, because they have now new paradigms that they have to live through that we didn't? Are they learning more about how to avoid a mass shooting? Are they talking about those things? How are they discussing those moments?
So unfortunately, well, let me back up. Actually, I'm about to gag you, I think.
Yeah.
I am a Gen Z.
Oh, all right. Right.
So, but I feel like it's important to share. I think there is this idea, and maybe I hope other people have heard of it, but right now I think there's this idea that Gen Z is split in two, and we have interesting, unique characteristics of those two generations that are Gen Z.
Yeah.
One, some people say pre-COVID.
Yes.
And some people say post-COVID. Some people say active shooter drills. That's what they're called. Yeah. And not post, but a pre-active shooter drill, Gen Z, and a post-active shooter drill. And I think those cultures and the uniqueness that exists in both of them and just Gen Z culture at large, it's important to speak to, which is why I appreciate the work that we do at Project Unloaded, because we are trying as much as possible to speak a Gen Z language to young Gen Zers. But I think still the generation at large is extremely traumatized, right? Yeah. These are kids who go to school, and even me in my last years, like high school and college, right? They were teaching you how to die or play dead in an active shooter drill. Mm-hmm. And it's terrifying sometimes listening to the things that we've normalized for our young people that should not be normal. The concept of an active shooter drill, it should not even be something that we should say. Like, those words would not even make sense to a person in the 1980s. Right. And maybe not even, maybe even the early 2000s, those words would not even make sense, right? Yeah. They shouldn't still. And our young people, whether they're older Gen Z, someone once called me an elder Gen Z, and makes me feel.
How'd that make you feel?
Extremely elderly, but you know what? It's okay. I'll take it. So the thing is, whether you're talking about the
mature Gen Z,
mature Gen Z is worse. I think.
No, but here's the thing, because when you said that, I was like, you carry yourself like a person who is of a certain age, and I was like, that's dope.
Take that.
That's dope. Like that's great.
Take that.
I mean, I always say that because I'm an old man, so it's like I'm on the elder side of, or the mid 40s, so it's like that conversation.
That's okay. I would never judge you.
Yes,
but I have millennial tendencies though. Some people might call my age and like the generation of Gen Zs, it's like 96 to the 97, whatever. They're called Zillennials sometimes. Yes. I don't know that I relate to that, but nonetheless. Because I don't know, those millennials are definitely something. I love being a Gen Zer. Yes. For what it's worth, I love being a Gen Zer, elderly and all. What I was saying, I think, is that like, it was wild. I talk about it any chance I get because it's accurate. I'm not 14, but y'all didn't have to do me that dirtily. Well, look, but it's okay.
They're not rolling up on you talking about where's your AARP card. They ain't rolling up on you. That's me.
Fair.
That's me.
Well, they do say to me now in classroom, they'll say to me, you were born in the 1900s? I'm like, so why did you say it like that? I'm like, so why did you say that to me? What did you gain from that? So
I feel you, sis. No worries.
Yeah.
No worries,
or they'll say, yeah.
Better by the day. That's the way I
don't want to get us on a tangent.
Better by the day.
Yeah. Okay. My dad always says, just keep waking up. And that's now what I say to the students. You just keep waking up. You'll be here. But, back to what I was saying, older Gen Zs, younger Gen Zs, it doesn't matter. I think the cultural distinction is important because we're able to speak, very specifically to younger Gen Zs because they have their own language, or very specifically the older Gen Zs because we have our own language too. But I think either way, the generation is just extremely traumatized and has experienced a lot of failures from the adults around them. And at the same time, though, extremely galvanized to action. They want to do something. And what I feel really proud of is that a lot of them want to do something online. They see a lot of value in digital advocacy. We have a report called Stay Inside on our website, and it's something that where we polled young people. And the reason it's called Stay Inside is because a lot of what they said was that I don't go outside. We asked about where do you go in your community that's safe? They're like, I stay in my house because my parents and I don't think it's safe to be there. Right? That sentiment is extremely disheartening, but still we see young people who want to do something. So even though they're inside, they're on the internet learning things. They want to be involved in political movements or just movements in general. And it brings me a lot of joy, and I feel really privileged to be able to give them a tool to do something, even if it seems trivial to the adults in their lives, right, who don't understand that this social media is where so much of their culture happens. Giving them both information and a skill. You know, content creation is not easy. Content creation is hard work. So giving them a skill, giving them a safe space to learn and talk with each other, I think I realized that there is still just so much spark in Gen Z. There's so much energy and activism in Gen Z. And though we're deeply traumatized, like what I see in person and what we see in research is that there is still hope. And I think that that's interesting, not to, be corny. I feel like hope can be a cornball symbol sometimes. I don't mean to be that way, but
I get what you
know what I mean. It's still, yeah, they're still looking towards something, and we get a chance to give them some tools to navigate that.
And it's hard too, because the energy of the past decade has been cynicism, right? And it's been that space where we are trying to find good ways to get young folks involved, and my generation continues to kind of hand wave the ability for folks to kind of do stuff, while also really understanding that this generation is infinitely smarter than we were ever at that age, right? They are on it. They are paying attention. They are galvanized in a lot of different ways that we weren't. And they have more tools than we've ever had to be able to do that kind of stuff. Are you seeing that when you're having these discussions and talking about the kind of tools that they're using to be able to do this work? What's the space that you see kind of most of this advocacy happening for kids who are in that group?
It's social media, especially.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because it's not necessarily platform specific, but there is just this digital advocacy air over Gen Z. There's a digital advocacy hand on Gen Z's shoulder guiding them for guiding us on how to use what we have for entertainment for a greater good. And I think too, there's still so many people in our communities around the country that work with youth. And, there are a lot of young people who say they stay inside. They do their advocacy they learn to do their advocacy through digital channels because for whatever reason they spent so much of their life inside, COVID included. But there are so many people, young people included, who are working on the ground and outside. And I want to give them their flowers too, because they are 15, 16, 17. They're on Instagram being political activists, but they're also in their communities interrupting violence where they see it. They're at the mayor's office giving their testimonials, right? Because they have learned so much from the generations before them, right? We have access to so much information. And at any given point, if you want to learn, how to give a public testimonial, you can do that by going on TikTok. And I think Gen Z sees the value. You can. You definitely can.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
So yeah. So, and there are so many things that you can learn, and it's not in a pretentious way. And Gen Z sees the value in taking that information, using what you have to get what you want, right? They will see a video from an attorney saying, this is how you give a public testimonial, and they'll watch it 3 times and be down at the mayor's office giving a testimonial by the end of the afternoon, right?
Wow.
Where we've learned as a generation that there is no time for us to wait, because there is no time for us to wait. The earth is burning. Gun violence is closing in on us.
Yeah.
And none of us are ever going to be able to buy a house. So we might as well make a lot of public noise about the things that we are passionate about.
Yeah.
That's what I see a lot of.
No, that's dope because I think that's also a narrative that you get kind of thrust upon from the old folks, right? It's like y'all ain't doing enough to be, you're not saving yourselves, so and we ain't gonna
You're
save you
always on
either.
the damn phone, you know?
Right. I do want to poke at something that you just talked about because I thought that was an interesting point too. Was entertainment is such a huge part of the equation right now,
Oh, yeah.
right? Again, everything from the music that we listen to the movies we watch, the TV that we watch is inundated, still. This is something that happened through my youth and to now. There's a ton of violence in those spaces, and a lot of the violence is gun violence in a lot of the things that we watch. How are you all bridging the gap with the kids in those conversations too? Because I still think that we are barraged with so many things that many times we're not paying attention to the fact that we're, consuming all of this imagery and all of these things without, being present in some of those ways. How are you all talking to them about the things that they're seeing and kind of interacting with and how that affects the mind state there?
It's interesting. So many of my students, let's say I have a 4-hour program day, I will have a few students who can spend all 4 of those hours scrolling on their phone. And I'll ask them, it's very true. And after I'll ask them, I'm like, how many influencers did you see? How many influencers did you interact with? Did you, were you sold anything? Did you notice that someone was trying to sell something to you? And what's interesting is that they'll say no. So, and I know that that's not true, right? You spend 5 minutes on the internet and now, those shoes that you just looked at are now on your ad or whatever the case may be, right? So there's this one hand of like a need to build their media literacy so they understand that like, yes, you're consuming content, you're watching your friends make skits, but also people are always selling things to you. People are always selling things to you. And that doesn't just stop at social media. It extends to TV and what you listen to, where you see ads in your communities. And one of the things that is really interesting in our work to kind of, I don't want to say disrupt, but disrupt entertainment a little bit.
Yeah.
We've been doing research. Our youth have been doing research for the past 2 years where they study how guns show up on TV. They're watching 200 plus hours of TV, primetime network TV. Streaming is its own beast. But for this project, they watched primetime network TV. And what they find is that guns as they show up on TV are not accurately portrayed to how they show up and how people use them in real life, right? TV will make it seem like if I just watched TV and didn't consume any other media, you would think that you needed a gun, right? Because you see all of these cop shows, you see all of these like super cinematic moments of like women getting robbed and Queen Latifah on the Equalizer needs to come in and stop things, and you think that the stakes are much higher in your everyday life than they are. But what we actually know is that most gun deaths that happen in real life are suicides as opposed to homicide or crime, right? And that conversation is not one that's ever really addressed well in mainstream, primetime media. But it's worth having still because you and I had just talked about so many young Black boys especially are dying by suicide at a faster rate than anybody else right now. So we know our teens are watching TV. We know they're on social media. We know they're playing video games. And we at Project Unloaded wanted to be able to exist in that space to do education where not many people are, right? And I understand it from a media brand standpoint, right? You want to make punchy stories that make people, feel things. And even if that thing is fear, that helps drive your engagement. But it's interesting still, because in that same report that I'm talking about, we also looked at ratings. And what the students found was that all of the shows that they watched, or of the nights that they watched, shows without guns in them won the rating. So we know that you can make entertaining, strong, powerful TV and not feature a gun or feature guns in inaccurate ways. So we always call to action, to our TV execs, to our entertainment execs, consider what you're showing, because we know still that young people, this is where they're learning about guns, through the media space, especially. So it's interesting building my students' capacity for just being good investigators of media, doing their own research, teaching them how to spot when somebody is selling something to you, and also teaching them how to ask good questions. I really appreciate being able to do that part of the work, because even beyond the skills, the research and the information sharing is such an important part of what we're doing, because there is a need for it. And yeah, there is a need for it.
I first of all, that is some super important work. As a person who works on the internet all the time and seeing how 99% of the people who I interact with can't read a lick, it helps to see that you're digging into conversations about media literacy and understanding what you're consuming in those ways. So thank you for that. You're making my job easier. But on the second side, there was a quick point, and I don't want to just bring up a quick data point without you having time to research it. Yeah. But if you do have any thoughts to this, I would love to hear it. I think a lot of the conversations we have around, especially youth from Black and brown areas, where another layer of the cultural parts that we've been kind of given and taught and kind of given down through the years is a very hyper masculine way of being for young men and dudes like that. And I have a small inkling of understanding of like potentially how those things are connected to the gun violence layer of that. Are you seeing any of this happen in young women too, where, a lot of discussion for women when it comes to weapons and things and guns like this is initially about self-defense, right? Of like, you need a gun because dudes out here are hyper violent, which they are. I mean, men are violent. We know that as a conversation. But are you seeing any trends that are concerning with young women in these spaces as well? I'm just curious to know if that's a data point that you all have poked at, or you might have any thoughts.
Yeah. In a general, I don't have the specific number off the top of my head, but in a general sense, one of the trends just in violence prevention right now that we're all kind of monitoring is that most, like I said, I don't have the specific number, but lots of the new gun owners, first-time gun owners, are women and queer people for exactly the reason that you mentioned. They are arming themselves to protect themselves, which is from men, and I want to name that. They're arming themselves to protect themselves from men, and that's a very real concern that so many of our groups in the violence prevention movement are trying to monitor and speak to. When it comes up, we still refer to research and talk about how the stat that I mentioned to you, when you carry in public, you are much more likely to be shot, whether, you're much more likely to be shot and and injured. But that doesn't feel relevant for someone who is a young woman who lives alone and genuinely feels like her neighbor or someone out there is going to do something to her, because we know someone out there has done something to another young woman, right? So it's not an unrealistic fear. Our job at Project Unloaded is to make sure that, especially young people who aren't of age to purchase and carry, they understand that risk before they're ever able to purchase and carry. And still though, that's a big trend, in addition to like young men always, young white men are always kind of looked at as I don't know how to describe it, but a group that owns lots of guns or are often first-time gun owners. And it's a concerning one for sure, especially while and I don't want to get too political, we talked about this, but we're in, interesting times in our country's history. So it's always a nuanced and balanced approach at education where we know that real fear exists. So, but what I will also say, we see that trend of women and queer people being first-time gun owners more than we've ever seen that. But still, lots of violence prevention work, and even in my programs, I see this, are led by or consumed by young women, right? And this is kind of a consistent thing in the after-school space in general, where young women are often overwhelmingly in after-school programs. The most people who will have a mentor, the person who is more likely to have a mentor is a young girl versus a young boy. But we know young boys are just as vulnerable and need that information too. So it's interesting for a lot of reasons. And there's another data point that I want to flag about young people, especially in our first round of research. One of the things that young boys said a lot of was that, they have a trusted girl in their life who they take information to, who they feel like is their confidant, whether it's a girlfriend or like, I don't know if y'all used to say this, but I'm from Florida, so I'm from Miami. So a lot of people would say, "Oh, my trusty," instead of like bestie. They have a bestie, a closey, a trusty, or something like that.
Yeah.
So young women have an interesting relationship to guns and violence, and we're seeing a new trend. But we're also seeing a trend with young people where young women are receiving a lot of support and also offering a lot of it to our young boys.
Ooh, that's a really interesting data point. Not only just because of the kind of research layer that goes into the work that you all do, but just culturally, there are so many moments where the conversation from folks that I've known who were, to be completely honest and transparent, were doing dirt, and they were doing dirt they weren't supposed to be doing. But they'd have their shorty, and they would go drop the weapon at the shorty's crib to be like, hold this for me. I got into some trouble, XYZ. That's one layer of it. But also just like from a anthropological layer of it, it's always weird because it's like the emotional burden that women always carry in relationships is also really prevalent, even in that small statement that of how those relationships work. So that's also just another thing to keep in mind for folks who are in those spaces. Just another thing that rolled around in my head.
And it's interesting too, working with young girls. There is this. There are two like sub movements that are happening on the internet. One is this like leaning into traditional, this like trad femme is what they call it, traditional feminine space where you really lean into how patriarchy has defined womanhood, and in turn it's making a lot more women more conservative. On the other side of the house, there's this like really huge decentering men sentiment. And what I'm interested in for the next like 5 to 10 years is how those two movements are going to clash with each other, right? Because they're the radical. What did I just say? The
trad femme and rad femme layers of stuff.
Y'all talk stuff. They're the trad femme young women or the young girls who are consuming that type of content who are kind of being defanged, for lack of a better word, right? They're being told, you don't need a gun, your man will have a gun. And they're still susceptible to violence. There's this other movement that's like, no, you absolutely need a gun, men are going to kill you, right? And the decentering men. So it's interesting being an educator in this space right now when you see both of those movements happening. But I'd be so curious to see how that continues to influence young women, especially in this political climate.
I mean, gosh, in the timing that I grew up, in the 70s, in the late 80s, there was a big push towards the feminist movement, especially in a house raised with very strong women, Black grandma from the South, who was like, yo, I don't take mess because I've been around dudes who gave me mess, which then translated into, there was a moment in the culture where it was very toxic towards the men in many spaces of the I don't need no man movement, right? So it was a lot of those parts of it that are still bubbled up in some spaces, but that also always butted up against men do a lot of terrible things. So it's like, once I understood the confluence of like those two conversations coming up together and being like, you right, and then being like, it makes all of these conversations have more context and more meaning and more understanding. But you're totally right. The kind of trade femme, rad femme layer of it is extremely interesting, and seeing how like there is a very interesting decentering of men and infantilizing of some of the conversations that go along there, and also dudes got to do better. Like all of those things can be true all at once.
Oh, that's my favorite thing to say to students.
Yeah.
I'm like, we don't live in an either or universe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's not either your boyfriend has a gun or you do. It's all of these things that are true at once, and we grapple with them all at once.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Agreed on that end. We're almost out of time, but and this has been brilliant. I'd love to have you back on the show. You are
Oh,
fantastic.
man. Call me.
Word, we should wrap because there's a lot of dope stuff in the conversation today that I really appreciate your
Yeah.
perspective on. There are a couple of campaigns that have been kind of employed by Project Unloaded. You Snug and Gun Changed the Story, and the one that you talked about a little bit earlier. Talk to me a little bit about kind of what's next for you all as an organization for things that's coming up.
Yeah, I love that question. So we just actually launched our most recent campaign called Working on It. A lot of what we've been hearing over the past couple of years that we should try to create more of a mental health angle in our work. And Working on It is that mental health angle. So the idea around the campaign is that, we're all working on something, whether it's a new trick in gymnastics, your mental health, but while you're working on it, you're safer without a gun around. So we are excited to have launched that over the last month. Excited to be working. This month is Pride. Happy Pride to everybody out there. So we are working with queer Gen Z creators to roll that campaign out. Next up, the next 2 weeks at my universe at Project Unloaded, we're going to be kicking off some very exciting programming in Chicago and a couple other cities. These are young people, like I mentioned, who are basically about to be trained to become content creators that share about the risk of owning and using guns, which is really exciting. And we're just always growing as an organization. I started working at Project Unloaded in 2023, and we only had one campaign. We didn't have this program, and now, less than a year and a half later, we are reaching 100 kids in our program where we didn't have any before. We have 5 campaigns that are out and fabulous, and students can contribute to them. So that work is our work. It will always continue, but more campaigns are to come. More disruption of media across social media and the entertainment space to come. And I'm really excited from my side of the house, like I said, I am a big advocate of teens. One thing I tell teens and young people and kids, I tell everybody, you have a responsibility to the children of a world. I don't care who you are, you have a responsibility to the children of the world. And I'm really excited to work with more young people to bring our work to more cities around the country, because right now we've reached 1 in 4 American teens. I think over the next year we can reach 1 in 3, right? And then so on and so forth. So we've got some lofty plans. I don't want to spill all the beans. Y'all can always follow us if you want to learn more and stay in touch with me and Project Unloaded. But yeah, over the next couple of months, we have a very busy summer ahead of us with new campaigns and new projects, programs coming out. So stay in touch.
Awesome. Where are some of the places they can go check out the work and get more involved?
Yeah, always follow us at Project Unloaded. We're everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, LinkedIn, YouTube, Snapchat. If have young people in your lives and you want to show them the young people friendly content, the teen friendly content, they'll see that on TikTok, Snapchat, and YouTube, and Instagram primarily. And then all the other channels. If you are someone who uses Twitter, LinkedIn, all of those other places, we're there for you too. So come find us, come talk to us, engage with our content, see what you like, let us know what you don't. We have a text program, so you can text with us to stay in touch too. Other things, you can join our newsletter. But social media is always the first play for. That's what we do. So we're the social media people, so it's always the first place that you should find us at Project Unloaded.
That's fantastic. And again, Olivia, you are dope. I want to thank you again for coming and hanging out with me on the show. The work that you are doing is so needed and is so profound and fantastic. I'm working on it too. I'm trying to work on eating more vegetables and getting these biscuits off my plate, because I got too many things I'm eating when I'm not supposed to be eating. But again, I think the onus of making sure that this generation is taking this into their own hands and giving them the tools to do so is brilliant. And, you know, anything that we can do here at Spawn and Me to be helpful, anything, if you want to share some resources and some things that we can run during the show, we would love to do that stuff too. And any way that we can be helpful in any of these campaigns, we'd love to be able to do so. So again, thank you so much for the time and spending some time.
This was so much fun.
Yeah.
I love to yap, if you can't tell. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
Yapping is best. Yapping is the best part.
Okay.
No doubt. Everybody at home, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to have more Spawn and Me right after this.
Hey there, my name is Naomi, and you might know me from internet things like hosting for IGN. I'd like to introduce you to my new show, This Week in Gaming. It's 20 minutes, short and sweet, and every week I go through all the important gaming news that you need to know, and then we have folks on like Khalif Adams, who shows up quite often, talk about all the important news. And you get to listen to it wherever you get your podcast, so it's easy to find. Just look for This Week in Gaming and make sure to give it a follow. And every week, Monday at 9 p.m. Pacific time, you get a brand new episode. I hope you'll join me.